Alrighty, y'all, JJK 261 is officially out, so let's talk about it. This is going to be my chapter review, so if you're not caught up, spoilers beware. Alright, so first things first, a brief recap, and you're basically looking at it. Yuta has taken over Gojo's body by using Kenjaku's curse technique, and he's shown up, and he and Sukuna are about to domain clash. And the majority of the chapter were actually flashbacks explaining how and why this happened. It was basically a last-ditch plan for if Gojo were to get taken out, Yuta then were to get taken out, we got one last kind of hurrah. So that's what happened. This was an all-time chapter in my opinion, and of course the reactions were hot as soon as it dropped. But from what I've seen, a lot of people in the coming days have since come around and really started to enjoy this chapter. Now, there's no wrong or right way to enjoy something. People are entitled to their opinions. If they hated this, that's fine. I already put out a video kind of immediately after 261 first came out explaining my reaction to it. So I don't want to retread too much territory with my chapter review here. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to focus on how much I think Gege cooked with his writing here, and specifically the characterization of Yuta Okkotsu, but also Gojo a little bit. And again, check out my reaction to 261 video, because that's going to kind of lay the groundwork for this. But now I'm going to point to some specific examples of why I think this is peak writing. Alright, so let's talk about the beginning of Yuta Okkotsu's story, but also Yuji's story, our two MCs here, because there are so many parallels and they speak volumes to what Gege is doing. So first of all, with Yuta and Yuji, they are both set to be secretly executed, right? And for pretty similar reasons, basically a threat to society. In Yuta's case, it's because of Rika. In Yuji's case, it's because of Sukuna. Now, interestingly up here, Okkotsu is okay with it. He's okay with being taken out because he thinks he's a monster. That's where this character arc starts for him. He feels like he is just a threat to everybody, doesn't do anybody any good, and so he deserves to be taken out of this world. And in fact, he tried to do it himself, but couldn't. Rika always prevented him from doing so. Now, we compare that to Yuji, who, of course, isn't okay with getting taken out, but however, once it's explained to him his situation and that he has the possibility of ridding the world of Sukuna, then he is okay with it. But it's not because he thinks he's a monster, it's because he thinks he can do some good in the world. So that is a very interesting kind of dichotomy there. Who is the common denominator that prevents both of them from being executed? None other than Gojo, of course, the one who is viewed as a monster by the rest of society. The strongest, the untouchable, right? The flower that can be admired, but not understood. Of course, as he's been searching for the answer to his own identity crisis, his own humanity, he is trying to preserve that in others. He doesn't want anyone else to share the same fate that he has. So that is why he is protecting these kids, and specifically with Yuta Okkotsu, why he is trying to help him not feel like he's a monster. As we can see here in one of his first conversations with Okkotsu, who again wants to be taken out. He says, I don't want to hurt anybody anymore, so I'm not going outside. Gojo says, but you'll be lonely. And he knows what it means to be lonely more than anybody else, right? And he wants to protect Okkotsu from this. And how does he do this? How does he teach him how to not be a monster? By embracing his humanity. After enrolling Yuta at Jujutsu High, giving him peers and friends, and giving him a purpose for which to wield his strength, to wield Rika in order to protect them, which is like the whole moral point of Jujutsu Kaisen 0, right? Yuta realizes that this curse is actually not a curse and it can be wielded for good. I want to be relied on by somebody. I want to be with people. I want to believe that it's okay to keep living. And this is what Gojo offered Yuta. He gave him this path to no longer view himself as a monster, and that was by directly embracing humanity. This is the same way Gojo found his humanity too, by wielding his great strength for good, by protecting what he believed was right. The issue is he just couldn't ever fully embrace it. And he talks about that here, where he says, I can empathize with the magnitude of his sheer solitude more than anybody else, in reference to Sukuna, because one of the most prominent through lines of this entire manga is the idea that with great strength comes absolute loneliness, right? And so Gojo has always felt alone, and Sukuna is the epitome of this, right? Because he literally shed all of his humanity in the pursuit of strength. And Gojo just kind of teetered. He couldn't fully commit either way. And here he says, I love everyone and don't feel lonely now, but somewhere along the way, there was a line I drew, not as a human, but as a living creature. Meaning Gojo, was doing these things. He did have people like Shoko, for example, and now like the students, like the next generation. So he wasn't truly alone, but he still wasn't able to fully cross that line and embrace his humanity because he didn't know who he was. Is he the strongest because he's Gojo, or was he Gojo because he's the strongest? I think I said that in the wrong order, but you know what I mean. He could never find the answer to that question, so this is something he always struggled with. However, the poetic thing is he tried to prevent that in the next generation, like with Yuta, like with Yuji, like we've been talking about. He tried to guide them to the path to not be lonely, even though he couldn't quite do that himself. So let's recap that really quick. Yuta Okotsu's character started at a place where he was a lonely kid who viewed himself as a worthless monster, right? But through Gojo's guidance, was able to embrace his humanity and find his purpose. The poetic thing being that Gojo wasn't able to follow his own advice, but at least he was able to help the next generation find their way. That was Gojo's whole mission, right? To cultivate and raise the next generation to be even stronger than he was. They won't be limited to special grade. And he wanted to do this so that they didn't have the same issues he did. He didn't want them to be lonely like he was. And he also wanted to change society, right? So this is how he was going to do it. And obviously, if he was successful and his students were stronger than him, then Gojo by default would no longer be lonely either because he would no longer be the strongest. And Gojo had so much respect and trust for Yuta, right? Even back during the Shibuya incident, he says, if anything happens to me, I need you to take care of the current first and second year students. Hikari should be fine though. And the parallel to what's happening right now is crazy. If something were to happen to me, Gojo's gone. So Yuta, you need to take care of everybody else. And the tragic thing here is Yuta is trying to do that, but he's doing it in the way Gojo never taught him to. He's doing it by fully throwing away his humanity and becoming the monster. And the tragedy of this is while that was the opposite of what Gojo had been trying to teach Okotsu, it's exactly what Gojo showed Okotsu. Kind of a do as I say, not as I do. Because Gojo himself wasn't able to cross that line and fully embrace humanity. And in fact, Gojo shed his humanity even more at the end when he was going to take out the higher-ups preparing for his fight against Sukuna, right? Okotsu was even right there saying, Sensei, let me share this burden with you. You don't have to do it alone. But Gojo refused. He did it alone. He became the monster. And this is just tragic for both characters, because despite Gojo's best efforts to raise up the next generation, and specifically Yuta, to avoid the same pitfalls he himself fell into, here we have Okotsu literally walking down the exact same path, and in my opinion, he is going to fail just like Gojo failed. And the irony of this line being Yuta Okotsu can't become the next Satoru Gojo, wherein we have Yuta literally in Gojo's body right now. But let's dissect this a bit. This was in response to Gojo saying that, the future is bright. We have Yuta Okotsu that you're still going to have to worry about. And he says, no, like Yuta is no you. But that was the point. Yuta was never supposed to be the next Gojo. He was supposed to be better. And yet here we have him just literally and figuratively becoming Gojo. So again, this is just absolutely tragic, but it is poetic and beautifully written, in my opinion. And I cannot wait to see where we go from here. This is something I've talked about a little bit in previous videos, so I'm not going to get too in-depth on it here. But this is why I think there is room for something very poignant from Gojo. Whether that is him wrestling control of Okotsu for some brief action, similar to how we saw Geto do the same against Kenjaku where he choked him, or if after the 5 minutes are up, Gojo gets some window there. But I feel like there's room here for him to kind of course correct and either try to save Okotsu from walking down and making the same mistakes, or maybe once it's too late and Okotsu, his fate has been decided, then Gojo, that gives him the chance to realize his mistake and try to do something about it then. Regardless of how that shakes out, though, what happened with Yuta here is tragic because he has gone right back to where he was at the beginning. He has shed his humanity and become a monster. And this move elates Sukuna. He calls Yuta by his full name because he respects what he's done. And that is never how you are going to defeat Sukuna. You can't beat him at his own game. In order to truly beat him, you have to ideologically beat him. And that is going to come in the form of Yuji, in my opinion, who will defeat Sukuna not by shedding his humanity, but by embracing it. So yeah, in my opinion, peak. But let me know your thoughts.